I think the biggest thing that's always kept me, because I've wanted to do like open mic nights since I was in college. Like I
Mhm.
remember Googling open mic nights.
Mhm.
Thing that kept me from wanting to do it is just fear, fear of the
Mhm.
unknown, fear of not being good enough. And I would say that this year has taught me that even through the hardest thing I've ever had to go through, which is a public divorce, that when you know in your gut that this was what you were meant to do, that it doesn't matter like what is thrown at you or what you're going through, like this has been my saving grace.
Hello, and welcome back to The Perch from the Wyoming Tribune Eagle. I'm Noah Zahn, the local government reporter here. This week, we're bringing you a slightly different conversation from what you normally hear on The Perch. With the Wyoming legislative session coming to a close this week, The Perch is sharing a slightly lighter conversation that our arts and entertainment reporter Taylor Staples had with comedian Danae Hays. That's who you heard at the start of the show. After going viral on TikTok during the pandemic and never having performed on stage before, Danae Hays began her first tour around a year ago after amassing a large following online. She is performing tonight, if you're listening on Friday, at the Cheyenne Civic Center. Her conversation with Taylor explores her transition from viral internet celebrity to live stand-up comedian, and how she uses comedy to deal with struggles in her life. Here's her conversation with Taylor now, which they had over Zoom.
So just for a little background, like where are you from? Where are you based in?
So I'm originally from Alabama, but I
Mhm.
live in Nashville. So I've been living in Nashville
Okay.
for 3 years. So I
Okay,
guess
sweet.
I guess you could say Nashville.
How did you get started in comedy and everything?
Oh my gosh. Um, I'd like to say since I was this big, I've
Hmm.
always just been the crazy one in every room I entered. But it really wasn't until like the pandemic, I posted a video of me prank phone calling a taxidermist,
Hmm.
wondering if he would stuff my dog. And he agreed to it, and the video
Hmm.
went insanely viral. And it was my
Hmm.
first time really ever posting anything like comedic online. And I don't know, it just really gave me like so much like confidence to start putting the funny stuff out there, because I'd always recorded myself as a kid. My dad bought me a camcorder like at
Yeah.
10. And
Mhm.
so during the pandemic, I just really got a lot of courage and confidence to start posting
Mhm.
funny online content.
And was it specifically on TikTok or was it a mix of like YouTube or was that something you got into later? Like when did it go from online to on stage too?
So it was mostly TikTok. The first time I ever stepped on stage to do stand up was February of 2024. So we're about to hit my 1 year mark. Yeah.
I'm just curious, like the differences are probably very obvious, like because on TikTok you get to re-record and it feels like a lot more freedom, but like how was that transition to making it on stage, like and dealing with all of those like in-person challenges and all of that?
I love that question. Yeah, TikTok, you can, like you said, you can re-record if you feel like you didn't get the punchline right the first time, you can redo it.
Mm-hmm.
With on-stage performance, it's so addicting because like when you're in front of your phone, you're not
Hmm.
really getting the energy. You're just hoping, you're kind of shooting in the dark. You're just hoping that they like
Hmm.
it. When you're on stage, you may have like a certain joke in mind that you want to say, and then the crowd just goes bananas at the first
Hmm.
half of the joke. And so you end up just spewing because the crowd's giving you so much energy.
Yes.
I would say the biggest difference is just like I'm a big energy person. Like when they're
Hmm.
giving me that kind of like smothering energy, like it's so addicting and euphoric, and that's been
Hmm.
the coolest part about performing in front of a live crowd.
Yeah. Like, how has that kind of shaped your approach to comedy then? Do you feel like you're more improv-y or like do you write up jokes and it ends up being something else? Or is it literally it varies show to show what your approach is?
These are great questions, Taylor. Like
Thank
very,
you.
yeah, very great question. When you have an hour, like right now, I'm still performing the same jokes I was performing in February of last year because we're hitting all new markets, so they've never heard them before, so I can keep
Yeah.
that wave. Um, I definitely have the jokes in my mind, like structured of like what I'm going to try and hit this hour.
Hmm.
if a crowd's really drawn to say like a joke about growing up in Alabama, like they're really like interested in what that was like for me, then I
Mhm.
might add two or three more stories or two or three more jokes that embody what it was like to grow up in Alabama. So it's a
Mhm.
lot of reading the room. Like I think a lot of
Mhm.
people they assume comedians know what they're going to say and they just say the same thing every time, but it's really reading the room and knowing like if they weren't really into this, then let's get off that and get into this. And if they get super like belly laughing about this, then let's expand on that. So it's really a lot of reading the room and understanding what they want and what they don't like.
Yeah. Have you had a time where you've had to read the room where they just didn't register with a joke and you've had to pivot really quickly? And
Oh yeah.
how did you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like when I was first starting,
Mhm.
I didn't give myself any room to like have silence
Mm.
because there's a lot of when you're first starting, there's a lot of discomfort in silence. You're afraid of it.
Mhm.
Just like rolling jokes out for a straight hour. Um, And as you start to do this more and more, you get really comfortable in like allowing the energy in the room to dip so that you can bring it back up. Because with comedy, if you're always maxed out, you don't give any time for the climax, you know? So I would say it's okay if a joke doesn't do that well. It allows the energy to go down, and then you know you've got something in your arsenal that can pick it back up, you know?
Yeah.
So just
Mhm.
being comfortable in silence is what
Mhm.
really has been probably the biggest learning curve for me over the past year is that
Mhm.
not every moment you're on stage, people have to be belly laughing.
Totally. And sometimes like drawing out the joke too, I feel can build that like roaring laughter that comes
Totally.
at the climax of a joke for sure. Well, this is funny. This might be slightly off topic, but I was just writing about sitcoms yesterday and like kind of how they're going away from laugh tracks and live studio audiences a little bit. But it was interesting because it got me thinking about like how as an actor, like how different performing for live studio audiences like comedy because you have to leave room for silence and like let the audience laugh and take in the joke. And sometimes it can shift what's said. And it's just so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's also another great point.
Hmm.
Like I think if you're looking at like the I Love Lucy show,
Hmm.
Lucy did such a fantastic job of when she knew the punchline was coming,
Hmm.
she just sat in it for a while. And like, granted, if this was a real life situation and you took the audience away and she was just sitting there looking at Ricky, it would
Hmm.
be awkward. But because there's a live audience there, she has to give that moment a chance to be lifted. I will
Hmm.
say the new sitcoms that are coming out that don't have the live audience, that don't have the laugh track,
Hmm.
they're very dry. So it's almost because
Yeah.
you can't have I Love Lucy energy with no laugh
Hmm.
track, with no live audience. So
Totally.
the I even find that if I'm in a conversation with a like one-on-one person, my
Hmm.
humor changes to a very dry, sarcastic humor because that's what's needed for a one-on-one
Totally. Hmm.
interaction, you know?
Hmm. That's such a good point. Because I mean, that's all the mockumentary style sitcoms. That's kind of what they are, is very, very dry humor. So,
Yes.
were you kind of the same way growing up watching sitcoms? Because you said comedy was always like a part of you and a part of your life.
Yeah, I mean, growing up, that's funny you asked. That's my biggest dream is to have my own sitcom show where it's
Yeah.
Danae starring in it, but then I can bring my alter ego, Sharon Jean, who's like this
Mhm.
nutty redneck Southern woman. She's actually in my show. She comes out at the very end. So my show
Mhm.
is really stand-up storytelling. It's not very
Mhm.
cut and dry, like bam, 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 joke, bam, bam, bam,
Yeah.
joke. I really draw it
Mhm.
out, but it's Southern storytelling, it's music, and it's character work. But yeah, growing
Mhm.
up, I loved the Carol Burnett show. I loved I Love Lucy. I loved
Mhm.
Saturday Night Live.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
I liked Reba.
Hmm.
Obviously, I like a lot of female comedians. Like
Totally.
I'm excited for Leanne Morgan, who's a Southern comic. I'm excited for her sitcom show to come out soon, but that's the goal.
And I'm glad you brought up kind of like character work you do and like what people can expect from your shows. And I just love you to elaborate on that. So, like the stories you pull and the stories you tell, do you pull from childhood or could it also be like maybe on a bus one day you see something really funny and you suddenly are like, that would be really good for a comedy show, and
Oh
like
yeah.
how did that happen?
Yeah, I've had to learn this because like I said, I've only been doing stand-up for a year, so everybody's different of how they like to find humor in things and how they remember it.
Mhm.
But for me, I think comedians are really good at like watching people's characteristics, allowing something crazy to happen in front of them. Like I literally have the craziest shit happen in front of me all of the time. And I don't know if it's because I'm a comedian and God puts it in front of me, or it's because I'm able to see the funniness in it. And then,
Mhm.
but I have a note, the notes in my iPhone where anytime something happens, I write it down.
Mhm.
My show's kind of like a chronological order of like growing up, coming
Okay.
out, and,
Mhm.
and now my life. I recently went through a divorce like 6 months ago, so that's a little bit in there. It's just like when I was first writing the show, I had to look at it through a chronological lens for it to make sense. Now my next hour might be completely different, but for now it is kind of like a
Yeah.
chronological order of my life.
I feel like that makes sense. Like that's the best place to start is pulling from yourself. And then the more you
Yeah.
see things, it's like you pull from that. But you said that you kind of integrate your personal stuff, like maybe your divorce and your comedy stuff. Do you feel like there's an aspect that's kind of healing about telling jokes about it? And
Oh,
yeah.
for sure. This set is very light because it happened. Unfortunately, I had to file for divorce 2 weeks before my tour kicked off, which
Mhm.
like that has to be what purgatory feels like, is to go through a
Mhm.
divorce and then go and make people laugh every weekend.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I didn't, I think because I've been in the healing process, I only incorporate very little about that just because my audience is so like confused. They're like, what happened? So I
Yeah.
have to give them a little bit. But now next year, or rather in the fall, when I rewrite an hour, I feel like there's going to be a larger chunk of what that
Mhm.
looks like. And being able to find humor in it is very healing. Some people probably would think that that's very demented, and but that's just how my brain works.
Yes.
Like for instance, I did a round of IVF with my ex-wife, and I had struggled with, they were going to harvest my eggs, and I struggled with infertility. Well, the song that's coming out tomorrow, it's my new song. It's called Broken Condoms.
Mhm.
I'm playing a pregnant woman. And like some people
Mhm.
would look at that and be like, are you making fun of like a pregnancy? And I'm like, no,
Totally.
this is
Mhm.
my way of dealing with spending
It happened.
$40,000, yeah, to harvest eggs.
Totally.
And then come to find out, I actually have issues with my ovaries. So now I get to play a pregnant woman because this might be the only time I get to be pregnant, you know?
A
So
100%.
it's just finding the humor in things.
100%. And then this entire past year, I just love to know your journey from like the first time you're on stage to literally
Gosh,
today,
okay.
and kind of what you've learned about comedy in general and kind of what you've learned about yourself as a comedian too.
You know, I think the biggest thing that's always kept me, because I've wanted to do like open mic nights since I was in college. Like I
Mhm.
remember Googling open mic nights.
Mhm.
Thing that kept me from wanting to do it is just fear, fear of the
Mhm.
unknown, fear of not being good enough. And I would say that this year has taught me that even through the hardest thing I've ever had to go through, which is a public divorce,
Mhm.
that when you know in your gut that this was what you were meant to do, that it doesn't matter like what is thrown at you or what you're going through, like this has been my saving grace. I've never
Mhm.
once looked at it and been like, why do I have to go on tour in the middle of all of this? There's been times where I'm like, oh, I'm not feeling it today, but and then I get out on stage and it just feels euphoric for me. But this
Mhm.
has been like my lighthouse. So I think the biggest thing that I've learned is like when you know you're meant to do something, it will come with ease. Like there's
Mhm.
not going to be a lot of friction. And I think in the past, I've really tried to force things that I thought I should be doing or I thought would make people proud of me. And there was a lot of friction involved. And once I realized that the thing in life that you're meant to be doing will come with ease, not that it won't come with challenges, but it'll happen naturally. That's what
Mhm.
you're meant to be doing. And comedy for me is
Yeah.
like I just love it so much. I love making people laugh. It brings me
Yeah.
joy.
Mhm. And pushes you through hard times. I love that.
Totally.
I love that.
Thank
And I
you.
know you're doing that for other people too when they
Yeah.
come to your shows. So,
Thank you, Taylor. I appreciate that.
yeah. And you kind of touched on this a little bit with the challenges of like there are days where you're just like, I do not want to go out on stage and do this. Have you ever been at kind of a loss of ideas on what to talk? You're like, I don't really know what to talk about this day on stage. And how do you go through that?
Um, I think I think when you're first writing the show, you can hit some of those roadblocks, but once the show's already been written, I mean, this show's been, I've done this exact show over 60 or 70 times now. So
True.
that's
Mhm.
kind of in the past, but like when you're working the material out in comedy clubs,
Mhm.
and you're like, okay, I've got an hour, but I feel like I only have 30 minutes of material. That's
Yeah.
sometimes when the coolest stuff comes up because you have to just be in the moment and a lot of improv happens.
Yeah.
That used to freak me out. Now it kind of excites me because I love just kind of like going off the whim, and just like figuring it out as I go. But which is funny because that used to freak me out at the beginning. I'd be like, no, I need to be
Yeah.
prepared for an hour.
100%. But I feel like, did you feel like this too? Like once you were able to do improv on a real stage show and see like how it worked for you and like how the audience received it, like that's when you kind of had perspective and
Oh yeah.
like, oh, I can do this. And like,
Oh
yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah, because Sharon Jean, she ends the show and a lot of hers is improv. She's
Mhm.
very like abrasive, very brash, kind of pokes fun at people. And when I
Yeah.
first started, I think I only gave Sharon Jean 5 minutes on stage
Mhm.
because I was so scared to do any crowd work. And now
Yeah.
Sharon Jean sometimes will go 25 minutes on stage because she just is in a zone with the front row and the second row.
I just want to know about some of your favorite fan interactions too that you've had in the past year and like what those have looked like.
Gosh, there's some crazy ones and there's some really just like really sweet, just like impactful ones. Like I had a lady last week in Ohio. She told me after the show she was crying and she was like, I have been just so depressed. Like I
Mhm.
couldn't find the light in life and I didn't really know how I was going to keep going. And I found you on TikTok and I laid in bed every night through this depressive episode and you were the only thing that could crack through the sadness. And like when I hear that, it reminds me that like there's actually like really personal experiences out there. Because you post something and yeah, you may get 100,000 likes on it, but you don't really know how impactful it was.
Yeah.
And that really made my day because like I know what sadness feels like, we all do. And sometimes it's really hard to crawl out of that grave. And for me to
Mhm.
be able to offer a laugh before she goes to bed at night. Like that really meant a lot to me. I've also
Yeah.
had, a lot of 60 and 70-year-old women hit on me and like say some of the nastiest stuff they've ever said in their life. And
Uh-huh.
those I just have to blush and be like, you're so sweet. But I'm telling you right now, Taylor, it's the 60 and 70-year-old women. They want to jump my bones.
That's crazy. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
And I can always tell when it's going to happen because they are just like locked in, like eye to eye. And I'm like, here it comes. They're going to
They're like
say,
they're gonna beeline.
yep.
Oh,
So,
that's horrifying.
yeah, you get a little bit of everything.
I'd lo also love to know about your favorite jokes that you've ever told and your favorite joke that you've ever heard. And this can be like a one-liner or like a story that
Okay.
like
I
yeah.
would say you have to go watch Cat Williams
Hmm.
do the little tink tink joke. It's about
Hmm.
a man that is racing people with both legs, and he has two prosthetic legs, and he calls him little tink tink.
Hmm.
It's the greatest joke I've ever heard. He's very
Yeah.
physical. His physical comedy is absolutely insane. He acts it all out.
Hmm.
My favorite joke that I've ever told without burning it, without giving it away,
Hmm.
um, I would say is the first time I went to Catholic church and what ensued after that. We'll just say I didn't do it right.
So what do you feel is kind of the humor you gravitate more like most to? Do you feel like it's dry humor, one-liners?
No, it's definitely storytelling. That's the way
Hmm.
that's why I like Cat Williams so much is
Hmm.
the long drawn out stories that are just funny
Hmm.
throughout, but then have a big ending.
Hmm.
And that's how my humor is. My humor is not one liners. My humor is not bing, bang, boom. It's
Yeah.
you're coming to be entertained
Mhm.
for, more than just a 20-second bit.
And then the last thing I want to ask you is literally like just about the future of comedy for you. So I know you said you want to do a sitcom-esque type thing. Mm. But but what else? What do you see happening in the future years? Do you just feel like you're going to continue to tour? How do you feel like your shows will change? All of the stuff. All of the stuff.
I'm not sure exactly how they'll change,
Mhm.
but I do imagine like performing in front of arenas eventually and, going from 1,000-person theater to a 5,000-person theater, from a 5,000-person theater to an arena that holds 20,000 people. Like, I just, I also just love that, like, it's rooted in Southern, like, humor.
Mhm.
And whether you're on the West Coast, like some of my craziest crowds have been West Coast crowds because I think it's fresh for them to hear a Southern story or a Southern comic,
Mhm.
And then, but yeah, I just want to be a household name where people,
Yeah.
when they associate Southern comedy, they think Danae Hays.
That was comedian Danae Hays with the Wyoming Tribune Eagles' Taylor Staples. Danae is performing at the Cheyenne Civic Center on Friday as one of her stops as part of her first tour across the country. And now I'm here with Taylor Staples, our arts and entertainment reporter, to bring us a roundup of some of the upcoming events in Cheyenne and Laramie County this week.
Yeah, thank you, Noah. So for today, March 7th, there's a Roundup Wind-Up event from 5 to 8 p.m. at Blue Door Arts. Also, the Cheyenne Chamber Singers have night one of their Homestead concert at 7:30 p.m. at the Pine Bluffs Historic Gym. And Danae Hays is hosting a comedy show at 8 p.m. at the Cheyenne Civic Center. On Saturday, March 8th, the annual Harvest Wyoming Conference will be from 7:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Laramie County Community College in the Clay Pathfinder Building. Also, the Delta Kappa Gamma annual book sale will continue from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the former Big Lots. Also, there's a Western Spirit Seminar at the Cheyenne Frontier Days Old West Museum at 9 a.m., as well as the Western Spirit Art Show and Sale opening reception at 5 p.m. And the Cheyenne Chamber Singers will host night 2 of their Homestead concert at the Kiwanis Community House. On Sunday, March 9th, from 1 to 3 p.m., Hawthorne Tree will host a poetry open mic, and at the same time, Cats and Coffee Connections will host Cat Bingo. Also, the 71st annual Kiwanis Stars of Tomorrow talent show will take place at 2 p.m. at LCCC in the Surbrug Prentice Auditorium, and Shine Little Theater Players will have their Behind the Curtain event at the library for their upcoming production of Steel Magnolias. On Monday, March 10th, there will be a Wyoming Women's Ranch Legacy Luncheon and Speaker event at Little America from 11:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m., as well as the monthly Valentines event from 4 to 5 p.m. at the library. On Tuesday, March 11th, the Shine Women's Connection program called Promises will be held from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. at the CFD Old West Museum. And then Cats and Coffee Connections will have a pottery painting event from 1 to 3 p.m. On Wednesday, March 12th, the monthly AARP Cheyenne Community Group meeting will be at the Laramie County Senior Center from 12:30 to 2 p.m. Also, the library will hold a musical mosaic program for teens from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m., as well as a laser etching for small businesses event for adults from 6 to 7 p.m. And finally, on Thursday, March 13th, the second Thankful Thursdays of the season, featuring Girls on the Run Wyoming, will be held at the Lincoln Way Event Hall. Doors will open at 4 p.m. for that. Also, Laramie County School District 1 will have their high school art exhibition opening reception on March 13th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. at the John Clay Fine Art Gallery at LCCC. And finally, the Wyoming State Archives Speaker Series this month will be about women's history artifacts. The event starts at 7 p.m. and can be joined virtually or at the Wyoming State Museum.
Wonderful. Thank you, Taylor. Appreciate that. Before we wrap up today's episode, here's a few of our top headlines from the Wyoming Tribune Eagle newsroom over the past week. Wyoming Governor Mark Gordon signed a 25% homeowner property tax cut, saying it will provide permanent property tax relief to Wyoming homeowners. On the same day, he vetoed an anti-DEI bill, which would have prohibited DEI efforts and mandates by state agencies and public educational institutions. Also from the governor's office, Gordon signed a controversial universal school voucher bill Tuesday afternoon, praising it as a remarkable achievement for Wyoming, on the heels of a recent court decision that found Wyoming has unconstitutionally underfunded its public schools. Following the Wyoming House's lead, the Wyoming Senate voted Wednesday to override Governor Mark Gordon's veto of a bill that requires patients seeking abortion medications to first undergo a transvaginal ultrasound in a 48-hour waiting period. The bill will go into effect immediately. A bill to ban transgender athletes from participating in intercollegiate sports, Senate File 44, which we discussed on the Perch the past 2 weeks, passed the House of Representatives on Tuesday, the last day for third reading of bills in the second chamber. The Parents Alliance in Cheyenne claims that closing Cheyenne schools was the intent of the most cost-effective remedy, or Mercer, study. They claim that Zoom-recorded meetings show that administrators in Laramie County School District 1 were considering closing schools as an alternative in the controversial Mercer study as early as March 2024. That's all for this week's episode of The Perch. I hope you enjoyed this week, and be sure to tune back in next Friday for more.